Last time on Hawkwood TV. The year, if you've forgotten, is 1992. Our unfortunate protagonist is one Roland Joffe, an independent filmmaker who cleverly purchased the film rights for Super Mario Bros. In late 1990 by hassling an old man. Since that time, he's had a few metaphorical flings with a few directors, and writers, and actors. At last, he has greenlit a script and knows which director he wants to create his grand vision. Okay, two directors, Rocky Morton and Annabelle Jankel, two subversive British TV and music video directors who he hopes will give this thing some attitude. So Joffe, desperate for a win, sends them the script. Everyone please welcome directors Morton and Jankel, the first crew members we've met so far, who will actually make it to the finish line. But wait, you might ask, what about those two writers who wrote that great script? Well, it turns out that Morton and Jankel hate that script. Also, they don't play video games. And honestly, they don't want anything to do with Joffe's ideas. What they do want is to be subversive. That's sort of their whole thing. And when you dangle the hottest household name this side of Disney in front of their punk culture aesthetics, well, you're gonna get a hot take. And theirs was, quote, "This is it. This is going to be our Batman." Welcome back, everybody. Let's finish this thing. From the beginning of their tenure, Morton and Jankel were obsessed with the idea of dinosaurs evolving into people. They didn't care if the film had anything to do with the game, they just wanted to make something about evolution and meteorites. The title was just a way to get people into theaters. The crew was just a way to make it happen. If you're ever in a group project, don't do this. But even so, they still needed someone to actually write the script. They took pitch meetings from various writing teams, but the only one we care about are two writers named Parker Bennett and Terry Runte. Bennett and Runte were comedy writers for Playboy and National Lampoon, but more important than that, they'd also worked in advertising. This gave them common ground with Morton and Jankel, and the four hit it off right away, throwing around pitches and ideas non-stop like some bizarre corporate version of a blind double date. Of course, it being Morton and Jankel, they didn't end up hiring the writers for any of the writing. They hired them because the writers drew a picture. This picture. The directors thought it was neat. From their first day on the job, it was obvious things were going to be difficult. Joffe gave the writers access to the old writing drafts. Morton and Jankel told them not to read them. Instead, the director sat with the new writers, Bennett and Runte, and threw around ideas every day. For 6 straight weeks. Since the directors had a background in short-form media like music videos and advertising, they were brilliant at coming up with new ideas, but had trouble focusing or remembering any of the old ones. Old here means from yesterday. What Rocky and Morton wanted was something cool, but also something dark, but also something funny that was political and smart, but definitely something about dinosaurs. Then if there's time, maybe add in a thing or two about Mario. Eventually, Bennett and Runte had to lock themselves away, just so that they could actually write something. They tried to imagine a movie with all of these ideas, and that was pretty easy, because there already was one. It was called Ghostbusters. So they wrote Ghostbusters, with Mario, and dinosaurs. No one ever called this Dino Busters, and that sucks. Summary time. Unsurprisingly for a draft known as the Ghostbusters draft, it's pretty funny.
Hey, anybody see a ghost?
All your favorite fantasy elements from the games are gone. This is a completely new direction, moving us solidly into the territory of sci-fi. But at least it keeps a lot of game references, so that's nice. Enjoy that while it's here. We've also kept the same rainy opening, but now instead of a baby, it's an egg, and inside that egg is another egg, and inside that other egg is a baby. This baby is named Daisy, and she'll grow up to be a college paleontologist. It's pretty cool to see that every draft inches us closer to the final movie version, right? History is fun. Mario isn't such a prick in this one, and even better than that, he's funny. Oh no! It's no stretch to imagine Bill Murray in this role, which makes sense since it was sort of written for his archetype. Luigi, meanwhile, has shed all his Rain Man aesthetic to become something of an intellectual, spouting lines like my favorite, "Go grease your head, you fat pig, scumbag son of a bitch." Classic Luigi, am I right? The biggest invention of the script is the Mario Brothers Mario father. He's never seen since he's dead, but his idioms and outlooks live on through his sons as they struggle to reconcile their feelings for him. Got some real emotional character development set up there. Props. Iggy and Spike appear in this draft as a pair of cannibalistic mercenaries, but they're still bumbling fools, so not particularly threatening. They manage to kidnap Daisy into the other world where she immediately kicks them off a ledge and runs away. Just this simple fact makes her a better written female character than we'll see in a video game until the 2015 stage of E3. Speaking of the other world, this one is pretty rad. It's a mix between Manhattan, Tokyo, and Beirut. There are heavily armored Boy Scouts, a joke that gets less funny with each passing year of American politics. But there are also priests who frequently knife fight in the streets, and I think that one's still funny. This world also has phone freakers. Ask your parents, it's his parents. And these cool street kids introduce me to my newest favorite swear word, Fungit. This draft also introduces the Koopa Tower as well as the Statue of Repression, two prominent landmarks that we'll see in the final film. Toad is here again, but now he's a wiry homeless guy who's basically just Tweak from South Park.
What the hell is wrong with you, Toad?
He seems to be the only person aware that his world is in a subdimension. Drugs are a hell of a drug. Also, he's a chameleon. I don't know. There are a lot of fun side characters in this script, including basically all the Koopalings as various just guys. Morton and Wendy are newscasters, Lenny's an accountant, and Larry is confirmed dead, having been murdered by Koopa for interrupting him while he was eating a cracker. Speaking of, Koopa is now a politician, and Luigi literally calls him Hitler. Koops has also shed his backstory and motivation, so now he's nothing more than a cartoon villain, but at least he's having fun. But certainly the greatest part of this script is the lengthy section of Mario Golf, inspired by the NES game Open Tournament Golf. Koopa uses it to kill all his political rivals with traps, and it's pretty funny. I'm kinda rooting for the evil bastard. The end of the draft has at least $1 bazillion worth of special effects, including a subdimension transition altercation like that one from that Doctor Strange movie. Wanna guess why they said no to this one? At this point, different parts of the production were working on 3 separate ideas of what this movie was. The art department was still working on the fantasy draft, building storyboards and concept art and clay models for a Wizard of Oz-style world that no one had told them was scrapped. Bennett and Runte were revising their Ghostbusters draft because the producers were tired of bleeding money and wanted to bleed a little less. And the directors, Morton and Jankel, had already moved on to whatever new cool idea they had thought up the night before without telling the writers. By this point, the film had already cost millions of dollars to make, even though no one had actually started making it for the past 2 years. There was some tension. When Bennett and Runte turned in their newest script revision, they were politely fired. But don't feel too bad for them, they'll be back later. By now, it was the beginning of March in 1992. There were still no actors, and now the directors needed a new set of writers. This time, they chose Dick Clement and Ian LaFrennais. Clement and Frenay were a set of British comedy writers who had worked together since the 60s. Aside from their comedy scripts, they also had a slew of uncredited serious work, including the movie The Rock and the James Bond film Never Say Never Again. A pretty good and safe choice as far as writers go. I hate to say it, but the directors made a good decision. Let's take a look at their draft. If you're a fan of the absurd comedy we've had so far, I have terrible news. This new draft is all satire and wit, less cartoon, more West Wing. Every character feels clever and quick-witted, which is an interesting take on an adaptation about a plumber stepping on turtles while moving horizontally. If you have a favorite line from the final version of the film that feels really witty and out of place, it probably came from here. We've also ditched the whole prequel idea, Their plumbing company is already called Super Mario Bros., which really makes more sense than just some newscaster saying it. We don't usually call somebody Super Dave, no matter how many Brooklyn gals they save. Mario's character's really interesting in this one. Super Mario is super psyched to be a super plumber. It's their father's business, and Mario takes it as seriously as a paramedic or a firefighter would. For him, it's an adventure. For Luigi, not so much. Classic Luigi, am I right? That tension won't really get a satisfying payoff though, so best to just forget it. Also, Mario is a womanizer. Scapelli is a lot more interesting in this one too. He's nuanced, still a criminal, but he's almost likable. He seems to care about his employees. He even convinces Mario to do illegal stuff for him, like flood the tunnel. Yeah, Mario does that. On purpose. As far as the quality of the script, it's certainly the most professional so far. The shots are quick and informative, never lingering on pointless details. A+ filmmaking. The other world is called Dino Yawk. There's no joke for that, I just wanted you to have to know that too. There's also no fungus in this one, which is a fungin' shame. Daisy doesn't free herself in this one. Instead, when she's finally on her own, she finds a Dino Yawk church full of crackheads smoking crack. This is a game for children. This draft gives us the Boom Boom Bar, including the Zoot Suits, the dance, and everyone going after the pendant. The Major Mario Golf spectacle has been replaced by a Major Mario Mad Max Fury Road spectacle. It's a televised blood sport with teams of cops, Goombas, firefighters, death row inmates, and mental patients. Also, Iggy and Spike. Mario and Luigi fall into a quicksand vortex and end up in Toad's hole. There's a lot of salvage junk, which is a pretty cool callback to the Toad houses in Mario 3, but he's still a damn chameleon, and I don't know why. In the end of the film, Mario drops a bob-omb down Koopa's throat and explodes him into a fine mist. Nintendo didn't like how unrealistic this draft was, whatever that means, so Clement and Frenet wrote a new version that was more grounded in reality. They were also given extensive notes from the directors. And wow, are those notes illuminating. Morton and Jankel start by asking the writers to bring back the fungus because it is, quote, appealing to teenagers and surrealists. But after that, to be fair, they also give some legitimately good feedback. They point out that the weakest part of the draft is the characters, and they offer a lot of good suggestions on how to make those characters more compelling. In fact, their critique is so good I almost feel bad for thinking so poorly of them. But luckily, that thought is swept away on the next page, where the directors decide to micromanage the ever-loving fuck out of the writers, detailing what should be added or changed, literally scene by scene. Like, Christ, why even hire writers? Clement and Frenet turn in a new draft, which I'm not going to summarize because I'm getting tired. And OMG, everybody loves it. Nintendo loves it, the producers love it, the directors love it. In a rare moment of optimism, everybody is on the same page, and it looks like the film might actually turn out okay. They shop the script around and snag some good talent. The solid writing and witty dialogue of this script is the main reason that the final actors sign on to the project. This is when we find our Mario in Bob Hoskins, a stage actor who knew Jaffe from London theaters back in the 70s. Strangely, he had no idea that Super Mario Bros. Was based on a video game until his son told him. Our Luigi is John Leguizamo, who was chosen due to his excellent performance in the Second City Improv Group, the same comedy troupe that launched the careers of Harold Ramis, Bill Murray, Jordan Peele, Tina Fey, etc., etc., etc. Seriously, the Wikipedia article for that thing is absurd. For Bowser, the script pulled in Dennis Hopper, an absolutely terrifying man on and off screen. More on that to come. After all these years and staff changes, the Super Mario Bros. Movie finally had a full cast. By the end, all of them will regret it. If you've seen the finished film, then you may be wondering how something with such a terrible script and bizarre execution could look so impressive. Remember, this is not the era of green screens, this is 1992. So this is a real set, and it's inside. So fucking how, and from fucking who? The fucking answer is David L. Snyder, the art director on Blade Runner. David was instrumental in finding the proper place to film. They couldn't use a Hollywood soundstage because there wasn't a building in Hollywood big enough for what they had planned. So David L. Snyder, along with one of the directors, checked out spots in Georgia, Texas, Utah, and South Carolina before finally settling in an abandoned cement plant in Wilmington, North Carolina, owned by the Ideal Concrete Company. It was, in his own words, love at first sight. Ideal Cement was a 5-story facility with 268,000 square feet of floor space. It's about the same size as 5 football fields. Over the next 4 months, a crew of 200 people would transform this abandoned OSHA nightmare into a living science fantasy metropolis. It was quite the job. It took 2 months just to clear out the concrete, grease, debris, and toxic dust. Even then, the plant had no electricity, no water, and no elevator. All equipment had to be carried upstairs or hoisted on ropes. The crew and some contractors had to dig their own water well and septic tank and install over 300 lights. In the end, the Ideal Cement plant wasn't just a movie set, but an entire standalone production studio. According to David L. Snyder, not only did we have enough room to build the sets, but we built the metal shop, the wood shop, the plaster shop, the prop shops, special effects, special visual effects, the art department, the editing room. All of these functions are in one facility. We never had to go anywhere else. At last, David L. Snyder had a space to play in. He began by looking at the parts of the concrete plant that couldn't move, things like large pipes, chutes, and columns, then designed the set inside that space. The result is a cramped and realistic living city with a future punk, steampunk, cyberpunk aesthetic, and there's no other movie like it because this set is real. Koopa's apartment, complete with mud bath, is a real structure built 100 feet above the city street. So when you see shots like this, it's not a composite shot. They're actually above the city. And while David L. Snyder was busy building the whole outside on the inside, the visual effects team decided to just go ahead and change VFX industry forever. Leading the charge was Chris Woods, one of the only people to actually survive the entire length of my cast image. He spent 2 years working on Super Mario Bros., which is less time than Jaffe and more time than anybody else. At this time, all VFX were done analog because you couldn't scan film into a computer. Only one company had ever digitized film, and it wasn't this one. Luckily for Chris and co., Kodak had just built a prototype called the Cineon scanner and was eager to test it out. The next step, figure out what to do with all that digital film. Chris Woods got introduced to a program that would later be called Autodesk Flame and is in fact still used today. It was in its alpha build, buggy as hell, and although it could create fantastic effects, no one knew what to do with it. So Chris built a team of 30 people. Half of them were traditional rotoscope artists who had never touched a computer, and the other half were digital artists who had never touched film. He put them in a room together and told them to figure it out. After the effects and film were put together, the result was less than ideal. All the high and low color ranges had disappeared because the film was log-based and Flame was 8-bit linear, and no, I don't know what that means either. So the team fixed it by inventing something called a lookup table, or an LUT, which competing company ILM had just spent years trying to figure out. Oops. Back in the physical space, the animatronics team was building puppet creatures that still look great. The Goombas were certainly a bizarre artistic design choice, but you can't say they don't look good. They're particularly impressive in the behind-the-scenes footage, since your brain doesn't activate its suspension of disbelief, and you can see that they're real. And then, of course, there's Yoshi. It took 9 people to control Yoshi, and the main puppet cost $500,000 in 1993 dollars. It would be the film industry's last cable-operated puppet, before the industry shifted to CG. Well shit, that was a surprisingly large amount of positivity considering it came from the set of Super Mario Bros. Let's see what the rest of the team is up to. Joffe had a set. Joffe had a script. He had directors and a full cast and crew list. Pre-production was ending, and filming would begin in 2 weeks. Everybody was happy with the tone of the film, and everything was perfect. But getting there had been extremely expensive. With his original budget basically burnt up, Joffe had to turn to distribution companies for help. He led tours through the set for executives from 20th Century Fox, Synergy, TriStar, and Columbia. But it was Jeffrey Katzenberg, CEO of Walt Disney Studios itself, who seemed most interested. After all, Disney knew a thing or two about marketable household names, and boy did Mario have one. Owning a chunk of Mario's movie would be a hell of a win. But money is never free. And as Jeffrey Katzenberg looked around the cyberpunk wasteland and Mad Max-style car crashes, he commented that Disney would really appreciate it if the film was a bit more kid-friendly. It is a game, after all. And poor Joffe, after all that he'd gone through to get to this point, wasn't really in a position to say no. Changing the tone of a script in 2 weeks without invalidating the work that was already done on the sets, costumes, props, and animatronics wasn't going to be easy, especially with a pair of meticulous, micromanaging, rewrite-happy directors at the helm. But Joffe was a producer, damn it, so he produced. He hired a new writer, Ed Solomon, known for writing Bill and Ted's Excellent Adventure. And then he forbade the directors from talking to him. Ed wrote a new script in 10 days with more comedy, less sexuality, quite a few continuity errors, and, unfortunately, no more Mario Kart. The directors got it the weekend before filming began. Rocky Morton had already storyboarded the entire movie, shot by shot, from the previous draft of the screenplay. That was completely useless now, since the script was entirely different. Morton took his storyboards into the parking lot and ritualistically set them on fire. 2 days later, the actors arrived on set excited to film all their memorized lines from that witty and well-written script that no longer existed. The directors, Morton and Jankel, had to pretend they liked the script just so everyone could get past the stupidity of the situation and start filming, but whenever no one was looking, they were literally cutting the script into pieces and taping it together with parts of older drafts with new scenes that they had just thought up. 2 weeks into filming, and the new script was so full of plot holes and mistakes that it wasn't possible to film anything without rewriting it first. Which finally brings us back to Parker Bennett and Terry Runte, the first writers who the directors had hired to finish the first draft. Remember they drew that picture? Bennett and Runte happened to visit the set one day just to see how filming was going, and Joffe pulled them aside and offered them a fresh paycheck just to get the script filmable. Together, the writing team and directing team rewrote the ever-loving fuck out of every scene on a day-by-day basis. The actors stopped memorizing their lines because they knew the scene would just get rewritten several times before the camera even started rolling. Rewritten pages were printed on colorful paper, and by the end of shooting, the final version would be called the Rainbow Draft because it had every color of page except white, because literally every one of them had been rewritten. But back in media res, the actors weren't too happy with the rewrites. Everyone has their own methods for dealing with overwhelming situations, and for the villainous King Koopa, actor Dennis Hopper, standing like a god atop the Koopa stairwell in full costume and makeup, it was shouting. After one egregious rewrite where a long monologue he had memorized had just been cut, he halted production in the middle of the day to scream at everyone involved. He made the writers look up the word act in the dictionary. He kept yelling as the crew went to lunch. According to Richard Edson, the actor who played Spike, The producers were looking at their watches. Morton and Jankel were looking at each other. And the actors were like, oh my god, this is amazing. This is better than the movie. This continued for 3.5 hours. In the exact opposite direction, the actors for Spike and Iggy decided to take advantage of the rewrites and just improv their own lines. No one cared since the rewritten lines were bad anyway, so they got to ad-lib the whole movie. It's pretty cool. And then there are other ways to deal with adversity. For example, there's alcohol. There's a lot of alcohol, which may or may not be how John Leguizamo broke Bob Hoskins' finger in a van door. You can see the cast in some of the shots. But maybe he was just unlucky, because he also got stabbed 4 times, nearly electrocuted, and almost drowned. It wasn't a very safe set. Even after the 2-month deep clean, the concrete plant still produced so much toxic concrete dust that the cast and crew had to wear masks. Inside the facility, in the middle of summer, the temperatures sometimes rose above 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The directors weren't exactly exuding a safe atmosphere themselves. The actors and crew members were always confused and getting conflicting directions since Morton and Jankel didn't seem to agree on what movie they were making. Morton would have an optimistic version of a character while Jankel's vision would be more twisted. They were obviously out of their depth and trying hard to control the uncontrollable. It was affecting the schedule and the production and the budget, not to mention the crew. For one stunt, Jankel asked Bob Hoskins to hover in the air longer when he jumped. At another time, she told an actor they were playing the scene too much like Batman, while she was wearing a cap that said Batman. Rocky Morton threw hot coffee on an extra because his costume wasn't dirty enough and gave him second-degree burns. Worst of all, Morton and Jankel didn't even want Mario and Luigi to wear their red and green overalls. Monsters. After a long 15 weeks, when everything except some action scenes had been shot, Morton and Jankel were finally relieved of duty. They were locked out of the editing room while Super Mario Bros. Shot its final scenes under its final director, Roland Joffe. On August 16, 1992, Morton and Jankel opened the pages of the LA Times to find the article that would destroy their careers. It pored over the details of the horrendous production, including unfiltered interviews with the cast and crew. The next day, their agency dropped them. Decades later, they were still losing jobs because in the 1990s, they had made Super Mario Bros.
I play King Koopa, the Lizard King.
We have practiced by eating insects, and we found them tasty at first.
Think of it. I used to do Shakespeare and wear tights, you know, but now I'm playing this little character that bounces up and down in a game.
So it's like totally tuned into aliens, alien beings, extraterrestrial happenings.
And in order, I mean, it doesn't require a lot of acting on my part.